Don't think you are. Know you are.
Now, these ideas of Plato's aren't just ancient, scary, but irrelevant ideas from thousands of years ago. These mystery ideas about a new society became the prevailing views of the Enlightenment era and the foundation of what these illuminated individuals set out to achieve. The kind of society being described by Plato is the one that elite occultists everywhere are still trying to engineer. We can see how closely Plato's ideas match the ideas of the Illuminati when we consider their stated main goals. Dr. Timothy Dwight says, "In the societies of Illuminati, the being of God was denied and ridiculed. The possession of property was pronounced to be robbery. Adultery, assassination, poisoning, and other crimes of like infernal nature were taught as lawful and even as virtuous actions. To crown such a system of falsehood and horror, all means were declared to be lawful, provided the end was good. Of the goodness of the end every man is to judge for himself. The great and good ends proposed by the Illuminati are the overthrow of religion, government, and human society, civil and domestic. These they pronounce to be so good that murder and war, however extended and dreadful, are declared by them to be completely justifiable, if necessary for these great purposes." So once more we see the idea that anything goes if the end justifies the means. We could call these Plato-inspired societies knowledge dictatorships, or as Freemason Aldous Huxley called them in Brave New World Revisited, science dictatorships. The word science just comes from the Latin word for knowledge. Just as operative Freemasons knew that having a monopoly on trade secrets gave them power and position when building cathedrals and churches, speculative Freemasons equally understood that having a monopoly on knowledge and science would give them power to rule in these new republics. The Catholic Church had done the exact same thing in the Dark Ages. They tried to monopolize knowledge and learning to gain and retain power. From a spiritual perspective, Satan will always try and gain control of the flow of information because by doing that, he can control what people think, which will automatically control how they behave. Since people were turning away from the Catholic Church to science for understanding now, Satan had to change tack and get control of the information flows in science. In The Architecture of Modern Political Power, Daniel Putzner outlines the tactics employed by the Masonic elite. Among them, he says, is ostensible control over the knowable by marketing institutionally accredited science as the only path to true understanding. Thus, the ruling class endeavors to discourage independent reason while exercising illusory power over human knowledge. This tactic of control through knowledge suppression and selective dissemination is reiterated in the anonymously authored document Silent Weapons for Quiet Wars. The bookkeeper can be king if the public can be kept ignorant of the methodology of the bookkeeping. All science is merely a means to an end. The means is knowledge. The end is control. So take this example. Scientific institutions tell us that we have a man-made climate change problem. Now, whether this is true or not, how many individual human beings have actually bothered to study the data or do their own research? Very few. The mass of humanity believes we have a man-made climate change problem because scientific institutions have said so and the mass media has passed the information on. This feeling that there are trustworthy experts in control of the information, bookkeepers as it were, stops the average person from going to it themselves. Just like people in the Dark Ages believed the church was trustworthy and therefore there was no need to go to the Bible themselves. Also, just like the Bible was shrouded behind impenetrable Latin then, so science is shrouded behind jargon and theories too complex for most people to bother with now. Effectively, we just say to the institutions, you just tell us what it says and we'll believe you. But what if, like Plato suggested, they don't give us the truth but only the information that will best manipulate us to achieve their goals? What if the end justifies the means? That's the essence of scientific or knowledge dictatorships. Those at the top are to have that secret serpent knowledge promised in the Garden of Eden, and they are to use it to control the mass of people below who are to be kept in ignorance. The masses were not to be fed the truth, but false information that made them believe they had the truth. Stephen Hawking once said that the enemy of true knowledge is not ignorance, it is the illusion of knowledge. If we think we already have it, we don't bother digging any deeper. By this method, people can be effectively manipulated and dominated. This is the foundation of satanic societies and institutions since Babylon. It's the same old pyramid structure, the kind which the Catholic Church employed to keep the masses in darkness in the Dark Ages. People just replaced a religious dictatorship with a scientific one. Independent thought was to be banished in the Enlightenment, and instead institutional science was to be used to control what the Muggles knew and what they believed. Aldous Huxley wrote in Brave New World Revisited that, under a scientific dictatorship, education will really work, with the result that most men and women will grow up to love their servitude and will never dream of revolution. There seems to be no good reason why a thoroughly scientific dictatorship should ever be overthrown. The priests of Roman Catholicism were merely replaced by a new breed of bookkeepers or information guardians on whom people would rely for knowledge. Jim Keith writes, as the sun-moon cult lost some of its popularity, scientists were quick to take up some of the slack. According to their propaganda, the physical laws of the universe were the ultimate causative factors, and naturally, those physical laws were only fathomable by the scientific elite. Just as Latin was beyond the understanding of the average person, so was science. As the people moved away from religion, science was presented to fill the void, and in doing so, the elite simply created a new type of religion called scientism. This is the idea that science explains everything and is the answer to everything, even when science itself can't support that worldview. Much of what we call science today is actually scientism, a mere philosophy masquerading as scientific truth. This new scientific religious system had two requirements: a false science in which people would put their trust, and secondly, an official institution to accredit, control and disseminate it to the masses. That institution was the British Royal Society. Virtually all the Royal Society's founding members were Freemasons. One could reasonably argue that the Royal Society itself, at least in its inception, was a Masonic institution. The Royal Society was to be a kind of propaganda machine, a forerunner to the modern-day media, who would sculpt and shape public opinion through the notions about science that they controlled and disseminated. The Royal Society was to science what the Catholic Church had been to Christianity in the Dark Ages. With the British Royal Society acting as the headquarters of the propaganda machine, they now needed to introduce the science itself. That science was Darwinism, or evolution. Given that the founding members of the Royal Society were Freemasons, whatever science they came up with would only be an extension of their occult doctrine. The theory of evolution is nothing less. In The Meaning of Masonry, W. Elm Wilmhurst reveals the worldview underpinning the new Masonic science. This, the evolution of man into Superman, was always the purpose of the ancient mysteries, and the real purpose of modern Masonry is not the social and charitable purposes to which so much attention is paid, but the expediting of the spiritual evolution of those who aspire to perfect their own nature and transform it into a more godlike quality. And this is a definite science, a royal art, which it is possible for each of us to put into practice, whilst to join the craft for any other purpose than to study and pursue this science is to misunderstand its meaning. Later in the book, Wilmhurst reiterates this theme. Man who has sprung from earth and developed through the lower kingdoms of nature to his present rational state has yet to complete his evolution by becoming a godlike being and unifying his consciousness with the omniscient, to promote which is and always has been the sole aim and purpose of all initiation. The spiritual implications of the theory of evolution are something that few people ever stop to consider, so I want to really highlight this. What was the lie from the serpent in the Garden of Eden? It was that by attainment of knowledge, by our own efforts, we would become as gods. Now what does evolution teach? It teaches that we are constantly evolving onwards and upwards over time, and if we are constantly evolving throughout time, where is the end goal? Surely the end goal is when man has reached absolute perfection. We cannot evolve beyond perfection. And what is another name for absolute perfection other than godhood? Evolution is the exact lie from the Garden of Eden, that mankind can become perfect or godlike by our own efforts, through knowledge, or science you may call it. Through the idea of evolution, Freemasons introduced the occult idea of becoming to the masses under the veil of science, the belief that man is gradually evolving towards enlightened godhood. What many also don't know is that the basic idea of evolution did not originate with Charles Darwin. According to Mackey's Encyclopedia of Freemasonry, it originated with his grandfather, Erasmus Darwin. Dr. Erasmus Darwin was the first man in England to suggest those ideas, which were later to be embodied in the Darwinian theory by his grandson, Charles Darwin, who wrote in 1859, Origin of Species. Now Erasmus Darwin was the founder of the Masonic Lunar Society. According to author Ian Taylor, the Lunar Society was active from about 1764 to 1800, and its prominent influence continued long afterwards under the banner of the British Royal Society. The group's name owed itself to the fact that the members met monthly at the time of the full moon, which suggests some kind of link to the goddess Ashura again. The membership of this group boasted such luminaries as John Wilkinson, James Watt, Matthew Boulton, Joseph Priestley, Josiah Wedgwood, and Benjamin Franklin. These men, along with other members, were given the title Merchants of Light. Mackey's Encyclopedia of Freemasonry says, before coming to Derby in 1788, Dr. Darwin had been made a Mason in the famous time immemorial lodge of Canongate, Kilwinning, No. 2 of Scotland. Sir Francis Darwin, one of the Doctor's sons, was made a Mason in Tyrian Lodge No. 253 at Derby in 1807 or 1808. His son Reginald was made a Mason in Tyrian Lodge in 1804. The name of Charles Darwin does not appear on the rolls of the lodge, but it is very possible that he, like Francis, was a Mason. In 1794, Erasmus Darwin wrote a book called Zoonomia, where he expanded upon his theory of evolution. It was based on the occult concept of becoming, the gradual process of attaining godhood. Even before then, however, John Locke, a prominent Freemason and member of the British Royal Society, had taken the Hindu idea of reincarnation, which had been brought to Britain by the East India Trading Company, and formulated his own ideas on evolution based on it. The British Royal Society accepted his ideas, and they also received the support of the male members of the Darwin family at the time. 2 centuries later, this occult concept of becoming would be transmitted to Charles Darwin, and the Origin of Species would be born. So the evolutionary theory clearly had occult roots that predated Charles Darwin by a long way. These occult ideas were developed by Freemasons before Darwin brought it to public attention with his book. Now remember, the reason that we had deism was at least partly because people couldn't explain the origins of life without some kind of god. The general population understood that things don't just pop into existence uncaused. If we came home and found an elephant in our house, the first thing we'd ask is, who put it there? How did it get in the house? We understand that elephants don't just pop into existence. Things which begin to exist always have a cause. Therefore, one of the key problems for the evolutionary theory to solve was how life could arise from non-living matter. If life could come from chemicals by some kind of natural and undirected reaction, the need for God to explain the origin of life was eliminated. This concept is called spontaneous generation. It was the only way evolution could even get off the ground. Louis Pasteur wrote, "To bring about spontaneous generation would be to create a germ. It would be creating life. It would be to solve the problem of its origin. It would mean to go from matter to life through conditions of environment and of matter. God as author of life would then no longer be needed. Matter would replace him. God would need to be invoked only as author of the motions of the universe." Could the origin of life be explained without God? That was the key question. Well, after scientific testing, the idea of spontaneous generation was quickly destroyed and proved to be impossible by the law of biogenesis. It just couldn't happen. No mixture of chemicals or non-living matter ever produced life. This disaster should have meant that the theory never got off the ground. However, this didn't stop men of science from defying nature even to this day. Evolution still has no answer for the origin of life, and the whole enterprise continues on blind faith. This is an example of science becoming scientism, a philosophy masquerading as undisputed fact. Perhaps it is epitomized by the following quotation from Dr. George Wald, a Nobel Prize-winning evolutionist in the field of biology and Professor Emeritus of Biology at Harvard University. There are only two possibilities as to how life arose. One is spontaneous generation arising to evolution. The other is a supernatural creative act of God. There is no third possibility. Spontaneous generation, that life arose from non-living matter, was scientifically disproved 120 years ago by Louis Pasteur and others. That leaves us with the only possible conclusion that life arose as a creative act of God. I will not accept that philosophically because I do not want to believe in God. Therefore, I choose to believe in that which I know is scientifically impossible. All evidence still pointed towards some kind of mind being behind the world. Charles Darwin himself unconsciously revealed this in statements like, "Natural selection picks out with unerring skill the best varieties." Statements like these suggest that nature has a mind. Only something with a mind can pick out or make any kind of decision at all, and if we're talking about something with a mind, what we're actually talking about is God. The idea that lifeless matter spontaneously generates life is actually found in an ancient Kabbalah concept called the golem. Isaac Singer writes, "The golem is based on faith that dead matter is not really dead, but can be brought to life. What are the computers and robots of our time if not golems? The Talmud tells us of an interpreter by the name of Rava, who formed a man by this mysterious power. We are living in an epoch of golem making right now. The gap between science and magic is becoming narrower." In the article, Towards a New Science of Life, EIR journalist Jonathan Tenenbaum makes the following statement. "Now, it is easy to show that Darwinism, one of the pillars of modern biology, is nothing but a kind of cult, a cult religion. I am not exaggerating. It has no scientific validity whatsoever. Darwin's so-called theory of evolution is based on absurdly irrational propositions, which did not come from scientific observations, but were artificially introduced from the outside for political, ideological reasons. Charles Darwin is a kind of prophet for scientism, who preached a new gospel, which is in fact the oldest lie of all time, that we're attaining godhood through enlightened knowledge, or becoming, as occultists call it. The Royal Society presented the theory to the world as undisputed fact, and today the media and education systems do the same. Most people have a blind faith in evolution simply because it's what they have been told is true. And this is exactly the plan. The masses are being manipulated by the controlled information flows. I repeat the Stephen Hawking quotation from the previous part. The greatest enemy of true knowledge is not ignorance, it is the illusion of knowledge.
Don't think you are. Know you are.